So I'm also just going to record it, so I hope that that works for you. And moving into...
Will you share the recording later, Fiona?
I will. We will share the recording, and we'll be very happy to edit it if anybody wants to edit anything out. So
brilliant, thank you. So
this is our format, and as I said, I'd just like to say a few words about business declares and the history of business declares, with the slides, which show that I think we all feel very passionately. We're a group of volunteer business leaders who got together initially in April and launched in September. I think in the UK, but with global connections, that business has a major part to play in tackling the climate emergency, and it's all about action as well as awareness. It wouldn't be, we don't want to get into declaration washing, as I'm sure none of you do. So this is some of the story with the slides that you may have heard. There was a letter to the Times in April and various activities, lots of great work by Shami and Love in terms of declaring climate emergency article and the initial version of the B Corp playbook. We launched in September the ICAEW, the Chartered Accountants, and since then we've been doing a series of talks and developing resources, and we now want to offer some webinars over the year. And we are very much recommending people to use the playbook on how to declare a climate emergency, particularly Marvellous version 2, which was launched at COP25. So just to be saying that as business leaders, these are some of the key elements that we have highlighted in line with many other declares groups. It's kind of like a family of people who have declared. And I think commit to tell the truth is a key one. And it's also about celebrating and supporting and inspiring. It's also about influencing other businesses. It might be about your suppliers, your customers, because by standing up and stepping out, you do influence other people. And it is about positioning ourselves as challengers and urging faster action, which I think is remarkable how quickly that's happened within the last few months, that 2050 seems a long way off. But we do recognise for some complex businesses that they're only just getting started, unfortunately. And we are a coalition of the willing. We worked with one organisation who said, look, we're not perfect. We really want this statement, this last statement, to be in here. And I hope we'd all agree with that. We're all on a journey, but we can commit ourselves to hold each other to account. So the key elements of declaring climate emergency are about having a concrete climate emergency plan. We're starting to see those emerging, and I think later on in other webinars we might get people to share those. So I saw a very good one from Forster Communications, so nice to have seen that from Amanda, Will. And in terms of publishing this declaration, it is all about, as I've said, acceleration and about interim targets that allow you to do 80% by 2030 would be a brilliant step, even if you can't do everything. So because not leaving the difficult last 20% too late. But it's also not just about targets, but about sharing best practice. This kind of network connecting that we're doing now, as I know we'll do in many other forums, and we'd like to work very much with other networks, business networks, climate networks, and almost do ourselves out of a job in that perspective, so that we have a widespread declaration movement. And we advocate for change, and particularly allow people in larger organizations, particularly, I think this is a great way for people to get active and involved and feel connected and aligned to what they're doing. So having said all that, I will hand over to Ben to give us a good example of what's been happening at JLL UK.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
Excellent, good. So firstly, welcome everybody, and it's fantastic to get so many people on the call for our first webinar. So welcome, and thank you for taking time to join. just by way of introduction, so I'm kind of an unlikely person in this whole agenda. I'm not a scientist, ecologist, environmentalist, sustainability person, but I kind of had an epiphany moment last February, which I won't bore you with the details right now, which completely changed me. My day job, by the way, is I look after JLL UK, the property and asset management business. And what that basically means is for large institutional investors like Aviva, L&G, Aberdeen, etc., Royal London, they buy property as part of the pension funds and other funds that they manage, and those properties are then looked after by me and my team. We've got 4,000 of them, from big shopping centres to small industrial units. And if anyone on the call has a pension, and if that pension is with one of the UK's big 10 institutional investors, there's a fair chance that the property in it will be looked after by JLL, and that will ultimately come to me and my team. So that's what I do. I had this epiphany moment last February, as I said, which is when I kind of found out about the truth about climate change, climate emergency, ecological breakdown. And, you know, you can't put the genie back in the bottle once you know that stuff, or at least if you do, it's kind of very hard and you're living a lie. So since February of last year, I've become a kind of advocate and driver of this agenda into JLL UK, and I will say the guys in JLL are phenomenal. Our sustainability team are phenomenal, but I'm a bit unusual in that I'm driving this from a business perspective and not being a sustainability person. And as part of that passion, I also joined Business Declares to help reach other organisations outside of my own. So that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction. If we go on to the next slide, Fiona, what I wanted to share with you is my personal journey, I guess, which I've kind of distilled into the 5 steps of declaring and declaring authentically. And that word is really important to me. And much of the feedback we've already heard is about, you know, let's not make a statement and then, you know, do nothing. It's got to have teeth. It's got to be meaning. And that's what the word authentic means there. So if we move on to the next slide. So these are the 5. I'm going to take them each in turn on some separate slides, and I'll talk through them there. But those are essentially the 5 that I've kind of created through my own sort of personal desire and drive, and let me take you through them right now. So Fiona, if you want to move on. Okay, so I would say firstly that I'm quite lucky, because JLL is an incredible organisation with an ethical and moral affinity to this topic, and we do have a good bunch of sustainability experts within the business, both who do consulting and other work. But one of the things that was troubling me was the risk of a culture whereby people said, oh yeah, that climate stuff, that's for the sustainability guys to sort out, and we'll leave them to do that, and we'll concentrate on our day job. And one of the things I'm keen to drive, picking up what Gillian said about cultural change, is actually this is all of our jobs, because we are in an emergency. So what I set out to do firstly was to get the facts together. There's no point in going to the board or any other governance group if you don't know your stuff and it's unequivocal and evidence-based. So I set out on a journey of pulling together facts and figures. The NASA climate website was one I used extensively. Extinction Rebellion Talks was another source of material, and of course that there are various others along the way. And what I did there was to pull together something which told the story of what the mess that we're in, and why we are in that mess. And also along the way, I tried to seek clarity on what is this definition, climate emergency and ecological breakdown. What do they actually mean, and why are they important? So that was my first bit of work, which I kind of just did myself because you know, I needed to. The second point here was about getting internal support. And this is a question of judgment, and this is a question of organizational size. So in an ideal world, you would get internal support from right across the business, be they HR, finance, supply chain, etc. But I obviously started with a sustainability team, which obviously worked well. And I decided that although really I should probably get support from all the other departments, we are in an emergency and I felt that I had enough. So I kind of stopped there and then took my presentation and what to do about it to the board. And I don't think there's any hard and fast rule about how many stakeholders internally and externally. I have a big supply chain of about 5,000 people in my business that work for lots of organizations, cleaning, security, all of that lot. They all also have their own agendas here. And in an ideal world, again, aligning up with them before going to the board is probably good practice. But I took a judgment, and the judgment was, I've got enough, we're in an emergency, so let's go. So that's where I hit step number 3. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Fiona. So this is the really challenging bit, I guess. So when I was thinking about going in front of the board, and indeed when I did go in front of the board, the 3 areas which I focused on were these. Firstly, being clear on what declaring actually entails. And a big thing for me, and we've heard it already in the pre-discussion, is about being public and being transparent. So if we are going to truly believe in this and truly stand by this, we ought to be confident and comfortable in making some kind of statement public. So that was very important to me. The second important thing to me was action, because again, we've heard it all already in the pre-talk, that if this doesn't have teeth, if this doesn't result in change, then it's just a statement, it's just words, it's just a document on a hard drive. And we need to make sure we've got action, we've got an execution plan, and of course, a regime to monitor it. So that has to be in place. And then the third thing for me was about what should be expected of staff. And the cultural side of this is potentially one of the hardest, particularly in a big business. I've got 1,300 people, there's 8,000 in the UK and 100,000 worldwide. So if I just concentrate on the UK for a second with 8,000 people, this has to come from the top, this has to come from the board, and we have to create a culture where people feel that they can talk about this stuff, but not just that actually it is really, really important, and they should be talking about it and they should be doing something about it. So that was the first thing I wanted to cover in the board presentation, which I did. The second thing I wanted to cover was, well, all very interesting, but what happens when you have declared? So this is the bit around actually getting that action in place. So for example, the top-down and cultural alignment stuff. So we have our UK chief exec, who is the advocate for this this topic. In fact, he's the advocate for EMEA for this very topic. And as a result of that, things flow downwards and across the organisation. Without that level of public support and real drive, things are not going to go as well as they might. So we have that in place. We've also got to make very visible changes on the ground. And this is a really interesting area because some of this is kind of unpopular. Let me give you an example. Flying. So transportation is obviously one big emitter of CO2. But what we did was worked out the tons of CO2 emitted just from flying. We looked at those internally, as in internal flights versus flights abroad, and some policy decisions was made. One of which was, if you can get to where you need to get to in 4.5 hours on the train, you cannot fly. Now that was the first time that sort of policy change had ever come in, and you will always hit some kind of reaction to that, and that needs to be dealt with. But if you don't make those changes and you don't make them explicit, then you're not living by what you're saying. And there are a load of other policy changes which I don't have time to go through, but we could speak at another time, perhaps, if you need more detail. And then the third thing is about implementation and monitoring. So having a specific plan in place, which we do, and milestones for monitoring it. And then the third thing was about how do you measure success? So for me, it's important that this topic is interwoven within the governance structure of whatever business that you're in. And a good example here is that the lead of sustainability for JLL in the UK is now on the JLL UK board, and that sends a very powerful signal, as well as ensuring that it is embedded in our governance structure. And then the second area is around performance management regime and recognition. So this is about having something to do with this agenda in your objectives, on which you are managed and rewarded and developed upon. So if it ain't in the objectives, then how much traction is it going to have? So again, this is something that changed, and we all have something in our objectives alongside this. Now, clearly, putting it in someone's objectives isn't the answer, because they have to do it and you have to monitor it. But if it isn't in there, then you've got a much harder job. So those are the three things that I wanted to try and seek out from the board, many of which are now in place. If we go on to the JLL declaration, if you like. So I won't go through all the detail, because you can see what's on the screen. But in late last year, JLL made a public declaration around three things, and you can see the lead by example, which is where we are putting our money where our mouth is with regard to the buildings that we occupy. You can see the educate and the influence, which is around raising awareness, training, not just our people, but actually our clients as well. And I do a number of climate emergency talks and presentations to the clients that I work for as part of what they're doing. And then thirdly, making it mainstream. The built environment creates something like 40% of all CO2 when you take all of the properties, buildings together, and therefore this sector has a massive part to play as part of the solution, as well as being part of the problem. And you can see again some key milestones and dates and plans sit behind them. I don't pretend for a minute that we have all the answers and everything is nailed, because if we waited till it was, time was moving on. But we do have enough of the plan, and certainly enough of the will, the culture and the drive to make it happen. So if we move on to the last slide, the two other bits for me when it comes to declaring an emergency is get something personal in there, because it's all very well to put your corporate hat on and do all this stuff in a corporate world, but you know what has the biggest traction of all, I think, when it comes to behavior change is actually, so what do you do in your actually do in your personal life? So I made and published some personal commitments that went to all of my 1,300 people, and actually they pretty much found their way to most of people in the UK and indeed abroad. I made a number of commitments. I'm not going to run you through them all, but I'll give you a flavour of some of them. So I committed not to fly, and that was in the middle of last year. My last flight was in February of last year, and I've got a team in India. And you might wonder, well, how do you make that work? Well, funnily enough, video conference is the answer. And in the time that I've not flown for work, I've saved about 25 tons of CO2. To put that into context, that isn't just me, by the way, that's me and a team that would say normally travel. That's about 25 years worth of CO2 of an average person in India. We've saved just by using video conference, and that's just us in 8 months in one firm, in one part of one firm. I've not flown personally either, and I don't intend to. The other commitment I made was to go to a plant-based diet, and I said, you know, I'll get 80% of the way there in 2019, and I'll go 100% in 2020. It wasn't that difficult because I've been vegetarian for 30 years anyway, so it just meant changing a couple of things. But again, that's in there. And next week, I'm giving a talk to 200 people in the organisation that I work for on nutrition and a plant-based diet. So that's also got some other side work for me. And I have also committed that I will look at the savings that I've got and decarbonise them in the best way I can. So I've got some pensions, I've got some ISAs, I've got some current account savings, etc. So whatever it is I've got, can I look at it? Can I decarbonise it? And I'm working with a provider. I've done that as far as I can. I'm not saying it's perfect because it clearly won't be, but I've moved a bit further forward. So those are 3 examples. There are others, and I've published them in the organisation. Say, look, I know I'm banging on about this. We are in an emergency. We need to change, and this is how I'm changing as a person, as well as all the stuff we're doing corporately. And then the final thing is around follow-up and role model. And this is very much about, we need to be living this, speaking this, and behaving like we're in an emergency, acting like the truth is real. And we need to be doing that all of the time. And I spend probably most of my days in front of people, and yes, you don't want to get known as a single agenda person, but equally, I've found that since kind of coming out with this agenda, as it were, I have a ton of people coming up to me talking about situations of grief for the state that we're in. Might be situations of, should I do this or that, or how do I grapple with the other? And we started to legitimize this conversation, which in a big global corporate, to have a conversation like this, and I've worked for maybe 4 big corporates like this, never happened before. So following up and role modeling, acting like it's real, and that can be little things from what you eat in the canteen to how you do your transport, right through to big things like giving talks and education, etc. So I'm very conscious of time. I'll cut it there. There will be time on the chat for any questions, and if we do run out, I will obviously pick them up afterwards or talk to people directly. I'm very keen to do that. But for now, Fiona, if we just put the last slide up. These were the 5, just to remind everyone. And with that, thank you for listening, and I will pass over to Simon.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. Your passion and your examples, which are great, and I'm sure people have questions, but if we move next to Simon at Ecotricity, that would be really helpful, and then we'll pick up some questions after that.
Hi, well, I'm Simon Pickering. I'm an ecologist by training, been a professional ecologist for over 40 years, worked in Arctic Canada, was part of the team in Antarctica that discovered the reason for the declining albatrosses, worked on flamingos, wetland creation, introduced beavers into Gloucestershire. I've done lots of things. So I've, oh, weird view there. Anyway, okay, I'll carry on.
There you go.
And as an ecologist, I've seen the world changing around me in my professional life and in my lifetime. So I've seen climate change actually happening, and I've been concerned about it and done things in my personal life. But I've worked at Ecotricity since 2008, and I sort of, when I changed to work for Ecotricity back in 2008, I very much, some of my hardcore ecologist friends thought I was going to the dark side, because back in 2008, was the solution part of the issue. So if we go on to the next slide, just say about Ecotricity. Ecotricity was started in the 90s by Dale. He arrived in Stroud in 1991, a couple of years after me, and was living in a van on a hillside, using a wind turbine to power his traveller's van. And it occurred to him whether he could actually build a big windmill and sell it to people. And he spent the next 4 years and eventually built the first wind turbine in 1996. And that was when Ecotricity was born. There's now 24 wind parks across the country and solar parks, and we're building many more. Next slide. So Ecotricity is a fairly deep green organisation. We focus our work in 4 key areas: energy, transport, food and nature. And I noticed that Ben said, and I have to say that was a really inspiring talk, Ben, it's really encouraging, that you're looking after some of the my pension fund's assets. That's great. And energy, transport and food make up 80% of our own personal carbon footprints. Energy in terms of heating and cooling buildings, particularly transport, obviously can be big, and food. And so ecotricity, we build wind farms, big ones and small ones. We make small wind turbines. It's our biggest area. We sell energy to anybody who wants to buy it from us. We kick-started the electric highway, or Dale did, because he recognised that electric cars were to be the future. Food was an important one, but we didn't really take that on until we became owners of Forest Green Rovers. And there, Dale introduced first vegetarian food and then 100% vegan food. And it is now I think it's there's 2 vegan football clubs in the world. Forest Green Rovers was the first, and it's recognised by the UN as the most sustainable sports club in the world. And as a spin-off from the vegan food at Forest Green Rovers, we've actually created another business making vegan food because people wanted to buy it from us. And giving land back to nature, and I guess that's where I come in, really, in that my job has always been making sure that our new renewable energy installations like wind farms don't harm birds and bats, but also recognizing that we do need to give something back to wildlife and create habitats. So our EcoTalk offer, which is a mobile phone offer, we use the profits from that to create habitats for wildlife. We've recently purchased an old coal heap, slag heap actually, in partnership with the RSPB as part of a nature reserve, so actually giving back to nature. So going back to the core, next slide. And so as a green energy company, and we've had, and this is not done by me, this is done by Gary, our sustainability officer. The key things are in actually not only selling green products, but actually walking the talk, as it were. We've been monitoring our environmental impact for over 10 years, and that's the key. And so it's to measure and monitor our energy use. And at the top left, you see what our emissions are. I've given a figure, kilograms per staff. You can convert that into tons by divided by 1,000. So it's now down to 1.2 tons per member of staff. And during that period, 2009 to 2018, the number of staff has dramatically increased by 4-fold, and the number of our customers has increased by 7-fold. So it's a period of growth of the company. And so we've, and also you'll see on the colour graph at the bottom that electricity and gas use did go up, and our transport. And the key ways to actually reduce your carbon emission are to avoid, so that's avoid importing grid energy, grid electricity. So we installed solar PV on all our buildings. We use lots of technology to reduce travel. Reduce the fuel efficiency of our vehicles. Also, in any of that, when we had diesel cars, we had these light foot things in that shouted at you if you put your foot down too hard, which are actually really good. And you got a point score, and it came up on HR so they can see who were the better drivers. We optimized the heating in our buildings and the thermostats, because buildings are really key to this. We actually changed the working hours of some of the staff, and actually we have 4 offices in Stroud, and worked out which was the most energy efficient. So for the evening working, and certainly our call centre on a Saturday, that was actually moved into another office because that was much more energy efficiency. And if we were only having one office running, that was the one to run. And then we obviously substitute the energy we import from the grid with our own renewable energy, which is absolutely crucial. So we've replaced the fossil fuel boilers in many of our buildings, particularly our new buildings, with electric heating. Although not all of them, we haven't quite done that. And all the food in the building, we don't have a canteen, but we do, as a company, it supplies milk and coffee and tea and coffee. And it's a funny story, really, because a few years ago, when the company was expanding, we did actually provide cow's milk, and there was never enough of it. And then somebody sent an email to Dale saying, there's never enough milk, we should do something about it. And Dale, I don't think he quite realized we supplied cow's milk. He said, right, we're going to stop supplying free cow's milk. I'll supply as much soy or oat milk as you want, but no cow's milk supplied free. You can bring your own in. So that was an interesting one. So that was there. And Dale does set the example in that when he comes to work, he comes to work on his electric motorbike, or when it's raining, a small electric car. So going to the graph there, the pretty blue graph, you can see where energy use went up, both gas and electric. And obviously we supply renewable energy to ourselves and carbon zero gas. So the key things that we needed to look at is those yellow things and transport. And so that is where we've begun to address our emissions. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things we've done is we've changed our transport policy by which it's walk, cycle, public transport, then a car, then fly if it's a journey longer than 3 or 4 hours. And I think it was in 2018 with the IPCC report and Bristol, many councils declaring XR, Greta Thunberg, Attleborough. I mean, XR was founded in Stroud, so I know many of the organisers. We needed to do more. So as a company, we decided to declare a climate change emergency. And so we revised our environmental management system, reducing power from the grid, but also removed petrol and diesel cars from the pool car fleet. Maintenance vans are still diesel, but we are looking to have electric ones of those. So that meant that they're all EVs or hybrids. And also the preference is to go by train, which has been quite a challenge for many members of staff who are used to jumping in a car and driving across the country. One of our big partners is the RSPB, which is in Bedford. And I know it's a bit of a drive, but it's, we now go by train via London. So it is quite a change. As a company, even as a green company, a deep green company, it is quite a challenge. We do have to monitor and measure. And we have declared to become carbon zero by 2025, carbon neutral. And that's quite a challenge because there are some things that do result in carbon emissions that we can't completely control. And we may need, as a last action, to do some offsetting. Now, offsetting schemes are quite common these days, particularly for flying. And it's something that as a company we regard as very much as the last resort, as it were, do everything else first. And we will use a gold standard IUCN approved scheme. We may go with the RSPB scheme. We would like, and we haven't yet found it or worked on certifying, a UK-based scheme for the final carbon offset. And it's one of my tasks this year is to see whether as a company we can do it. I mean, we've planted a woodland ourselves for some of our offsetting, but some of the future offsetting we may need to use something else. And then if we go on to the last slide, I think the key things to remember that business has a vital role to play in the climate crisis. Some of the tools of business are exactly what we need. Innovation, that relentless focus on efficiency, cost effectiveness and targets. And we need to refocus business with a singular focus away from just profit, but also take responsibility. So declaring a climate change emergency is the first step. But as Ben said, it's not just a statement. The key is it being a real commitment and making real change. And also recognizing that for some businesses, that might mean reconfiguring the business model. But as a company, we believe this is how business should be in the 21st century, needs to operate if we're going to get to the end of the century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I will just open the floor in a sense to questions and dialogue. It would be great. I think there were quite a few questions on the chat as well in response to some of what Ben has talked about, but I'm sure with lots of practical examples that Simon's given as well, we might have some of those. And if you wanted to raise your hand, I think if we go on, some of us might go on gallery view, we can see where everybody is. I noticed that was a question from Jules, perhaps if we bring you in first, just to Ben, around how do you find it, whether people resist what you're saying? I think that was your question, Jules. Do you want to just say that again?
I just wondered if anyone had been resistant and how you tackled that, and also if anyone has felt sort of overwhelmed and I put experienced, I didn't mean, or have experienced difficulty taking this on board, because of course the implication is that we're all culpable. So there's a sense we all have to take responsibility for the current situation. And we know with younger people, they're experiencing, there's climate depression and things happening. So, you know, it's often difficult to know what to do. I just wondered if you've had any of those issues and how you've tackled them, if so.
Yeah, thanks, Jules. Great question, and really difficult. Resistance, yes. A lot of reaction that's resistance tends to be around, yeah, but I deserve it. I deserve to take my long haul flights because I work really hard. I deserve to spend money on stuff I want because I work really hard, and I deserve to eat whatever part of the food chain I want to eat because I work really hard. And sorry, but I spent my life doing this, and who are you to tell me I can't? That's a sort of general type of resistant feel, and one has to be really careful here, because if you come across as preaching and you turn people off, you've maybe lost them. And really, I wouldn't say there's any hard and fast rule about how to deal with this stuff, because it all depends on the person, the context, and the situation. But as a general rule, I would try to make it impersonal and fact based, and just say, yes, that is true, but look at all the things you have had, and look at all the good things that have happened, and look at all the things that your children or your nephews or your next generation probably won't have. And actually, rather than concentrating on what you think you deserve and what the future holds for you, why not think about the good things that you've had and what it holds for the next generation? So try and make it a sort of fact-based, but also focusing on the positives of the past, bringing in people's families, albeit emotive and maybe a contentious thing to say, is something else I might do, again, depending on the individual and the context, and say, well, you know, what sort of world is your child going to be in the next 20 years? Because for one thing, it's going to be nothing like it is today. And would you not like them to have as good a time as possible whilst they can? And would you not do stuff to help them? And when you put it into that context, kind of the penny does drop with some, but maybe not some others. Just on the overwhelmed, sorry.
I was just going to add in a couple more questions, which was that are there any staff incentives? So the other side of it, and maybe we'll come back to Simon as well, because this question about was there any pushback on the change in the milk? So finish off Ben, but then we'll come over to Simon. So were there any ways to incentivize people to reduce their carbon and ecological footprints?
Well, there's the carrot, which is the objectives and performance reviews. So it's in there. Equally, if somebody said, yeah, but I can fly for 20 quid, or I can get the train for 300, what do you want me to do? The organisation has said, we will pay the extra on.
Oh, you just cut out, Ben. So
of, you know, swapping from one thing to another was very much in there. Not necessarily an incentive as such, but more of a enabler, should I say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing is certainly sort of kickbacks. Certainly ecotricity, because it's very much a young workforce. The food issue is not so much of an issue, a thing, because a huge percentage of the staff are either vegan or vegetarian anyway. So the milk kickback wasn't that great. Some people do bring their own milk in, that's fair enough. I think the issue that as a company we do have, it's the traveling issue. Certainly in people's personal lives, and it goes back to what Ben was saying, you know, I've worked hard, I deserve a holiday in Indonesia or somewhere, things like that. And particularly because it's a younger workforce, people do want to travel. And certainly as a company, the issue of for managers, when people saying, look, you know, I'm off to a meeting in Scotland, I'm going to go by train, it's going to cost 300 quid, whereas it's, you know, 150 quid by EasyJet. You know, that is quite a challenge, but that is the company policy, so that's what we're doing. So it's that change, but it's also people thinking in a different way. I mean, it's actually lots of people, because they've been brought up with cars, perhaps haven't taken trains quite that often, and it's a new experience for them. And so taking it for business, it is a changing culture, and it has to be brought in gently, I think. You know, that's our experience, certainly. But yes, obviously we do get kickbacks, and it is this "I deserve, I've done well" attitude. Quite a challenge, I think. I'd be interested to know how you deal with it.
Well, I wonder if we should take another question now from Kath at Invivo about how much have either of you or your companies, Ecotricity and JLL, taken supply chain emissions into account?
Yeah, supply chains from an Ecotricity point of view is that we're beginning to monitor those, but I think what we're doing is very much getting our own house in order first to take that high moral ground, as it were. Now, in terms of appointing consultants, we do request a copy of everybody's environmental policy, and we can use that as a criteria in assessing consultants or external contractors. And certainly in terms of buying cleaning products and various other people we have working for us, particularly in the buildings where there's a bigger choice, we do try and make, when we try and employ all local people really, or local firms. But yeah, the supply chain is a challenge, I have to say, in some things. But I mean, in terms of wind turbines, I mean, they're pretty green anyway.
Yeah, yes, perhaps the supply chain is a bit different. What about for you, Ben, in JLL?
Very similar. The environmental credentials are part of the procurement screening criteria, and all of those organisations have to supply what they have from a policy level. We're working on how do we get into the real detail of this by understanding what actually is their footprint and what do we think about it. But we do at least have the philosophy and the directional stuff in place. But there is definitely more work that needing to be done for sure.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, I mean, we're just moving into battery storage technology as a company, as to balance the electricity grid. And there's a real challenge there because they're mostly lithium-based batteries, and the most common one is lithium cobalt. And due to the environmental, human abuse and corruption of cobalt extraction in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's quite a challenge when we are looking at lithium zinc or lithium ferrous batteries. So that is something as a company, I mean, certainly Dale would say, let's go with the most environmentally friendly, as long as even if the profit margin is not as great. Obviously it has to make a profit. You can't run a company without making a profit, but it is quite a challenge. And if anybody reads what did I write a letter for? A Country File magazine. I've just done a lot of research on that, and there'll be a letter there in the next publication with a bit about that.
Well, that's great. And I just not conscious, we've been looking at questions on chat, but if anybody wanted to come off mute and ask a specific question, we do have some more time now to do that, and very happy to give you the floor in that sense.
Hi, sorry, one question from me. So kind of going back to supply chain. So you both work for slightly bigger companies than I work for. We're a small company with 14 members of staff. As part of our kind of climate positive plan, we said we want to inspire our suppliers and to work with people who share our vision of kind of net zero. I mean, I don't know if either of you have any ideas, or if anyone has any ideas, but how to kind of inspire kind of suppliers who are a lot bigger than us to kind of declare a climate emergency.
I mean, do you know your own emissions to start with? I mean, sorry to come back to that one, where you're coming from. I just noticed the window behind you. I don't know if it's a rented building or one of Ben's buildings that you're in, but it didn't look like it was secondary glazed.
No, it's not secondary glazed. It's we rent a unit within an office, and it's a listed building, so we can't put secondary glazing in, which is one thing.
Sorry, that is a complete and utter myth. You can put secondary glazing in listed buildings.
Oh, good. Well, in that case, I will go back to our landlord and tell him.
Yeah. That's, you can't do anything to a listed building. That is actually, that needs to be challenged. And yeah, going back to the landlords, and obviously get a good landlord like Ben.
Oh no, completely. I mean, that's you've really made my life a lot easier. So thank you very much.
And I think there's also the issue. I spoke to Amanda, your CEO. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that. She said to me, "Well, we might challenge our lawyers and challenge our accountants." And
I had that conversation with her earlier about certainly our accountants who they rarely come back with anything particularly useful. But it's yeah, we're kind of our plan is to only work with people who kind of share our values. So if they don't, then eventually they will fall by the wayside.
I think that's such a strong incentive actually to spread this momentum. We need to spread it rapidly. So, I really applaud what you're doing there.
And just going back to the supply chain issue, I mean, I didn't read it out, but the bottom of our environmental policy, which is on our website, it says, we will not work directly with the organisations involved in factory farming, animal slaughter, animal testing, arms, tobacco, nuclear power, fracking, GMOs, or anything else we consider ethical, immoral, or just plain wrong. And that's the sort of the stance we take. When it comes to obviously assessing consultants, it's a bit more specific than that, and we look at their environmental performance. But that's the basic sort of steer we have from Dale.
And just to say to Jenny, who's put something on the chat, that I hope there is scope to ask supply chain contractors for their own declarations. So that's how you spread something.
Absolutely.
It becomes the right thing to do.
And that's interestingly, that is just what I was talking to our communications and our business to business team about how we go about that. And I'm actually speaking at a TPI, third party intermediary conference. These are the people who buy electricity in a couple of months' time. And they are absolutely crucial in terms of taking their stance, because they are absolutely many, but also with all their hundreds of clients. So it is where we go from here. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, just to follow in on that, if people can hear me, I'm an ISO 14001 auditor. It's Jenny talking, by the way. And my concern is that ISO 14001 will take too long to catch up, and we haven't got time. So it is a case of building in this now to environmental management systems. And fantastic what you're doing, Simon and Ben, as companies leading the way to make sure that we just start asking for declarations of climate emergency, and if necessary, their action plans to back it up as part of procurement and supply chain management.
Thank you very much. Yes. So anything else that's coming from perhaps what you've probably got some tips and ideas, and every company is different, but are there any other questions people have about the challenges around declaring?
I am quite interested. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go on. Oh, okay. Thank you. I am quite interested, Ben, in just that you said you weren't an environmentalist, and you sound like one to me. So I think that's a really good stance in a way that you can go into, I guess, talk to a different audience and bring ideas that might be challenging. But I'm just interested in that self-identification, as it were.
Yeah. So what I meant at the outset, and apologies if I didn't convey this very well, is that I've spent my whole life working in outsourcing one way or another, either client side advisory or supply side. So the whole question of the environment, although I'm generally an ethical sort of person at heart, it hasn't been part of my job or anything that I've had to do in my entire working life until now. And as I say, because I had this epiphany moment, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I think what's been really quite powerful is that most people, get the talk from the sustainability team, some of which, they take with an open mind, and some of which they don't. But to actually have someone who's actually from the business, whose job it is to, make money, save cost, and all the rest of it, actually now saying, hang about, we shouldn't be doing this if it's not compatible with the environment, is a bit of a sort of bolt from the blue. And because my main driver is actually the climate and the ethics and the morals around it, not the money, people thinking, my God, if he's doing that, then we perhaps need to listen, but perhaps even more than we might do, to the sustainability guys who are actually paid to do it, because I'm not paid to do this. In fact, it might harm my own business P&L, for example. So that's where it's different. That said, there is money to be made, of course, in sustainability products, and whether it's battery technology or something else. So there is a commercial angle to it, but my motivation isn't that, and I think that's why it's probably had more of an effect than I was perhaps anticipating.
Thank you. Makes total sense. Yeah, keep doing it. It's great.
Thank you.
Was there someone else wanted to come in, and then Kath has a question as well? Anyone else before Kath?
Yeah, it's Andy here. I just started to ask a question a little while ago. I was just trying to get straight in my head the way into this. So to me, it feels like we should measure what it means to be, how far we have to go before we get to carbon neutrality, and then get everybody's at the senior levels buy-in, and then have some idea of how we get there, and then declare, and then start taking action and putting the rest of the detail. Is that about right? I got the sense that some people have maybe declared earlier than that.
Well, I think it's a good point. It may depend on the complexity of your business, but it is a chicken and egg process where you need to get buy-in to the idea, but you can't answer everything, because this is accelerating your existing sustainability program. There is a value in very much, so I don't know if someone could go on mute, but there is a real value in that sense of leading the way, I think. So others may want to answer. So Simon, yeah.
I would suggest that it's probably better to declare first. I know it sounds the wrong way around, but if you've got your senior management team on board and they have understood the principles of it, work out the details later, because that's what I said, because it's about, I mean, as a company, you probably don't know how you're going to make your profits in 10 years' time, unless you're a long-term mining company or something and you've got a plan. I think the important thing is get the senior management on board, declare a climate change emergency, and then work from there. You may not get to being carbon zero by your date, but the key thing is to take out those big emissions first. And the big emissions, as Ben and I have said, it's the heating and cooling of buildings and transport, and then food. If you deal with those, you're 80% of the way there, unless you're a very this company.
No, that's very clear. Thank you.
And Kath, did you want to ask your question from carbon numbers?
Yes, no, I was just curious, because one of the things I've been looking a lot into is to see whether I can help sort of other managers in the company to understand our impact. And one of the things we normally, the managers look towards, is KPIs and other indicators. And obviously I would like to put the carbon numbers into those as indicators as well. But I'm sort of looking towards sort of models that will help me do that.
I mean, presumably, I mean, I don't know the details you're building, Kath, but business, but I suspect just looking at energy bills to start with.
Yeah, no, we're doing carbon footprint calculations. We know we have a good understanding of that. But I guess I want to tie it together with the financial data of the company,
Okay.
and having that kind of understanding. It's almost like so if we have done a lot of commitments where we are saying that we want to take all these things into account, and if you go into the boardroom and say we're suggesting this change or this new investment, you will always have very good. You will be asked for data about, is this affordable? Can we afford this investment? All these things. When it comes to an environmental impact, that you never ask for the same kind of. Very rarely you ask for the same kind of evidence, whether the impact is this big or this small. So I guess this is what I'm.
I think there may be a link here to what Aviva, Steve Waygood of Aviva is trying to do with the International Panel on Climate Finance.
I was very curious to hear about that. That was also one of my questions.
And obviously it's a complex area, but he is working to create a broad coalition that would influence potentially different legislation at COP26, which really accounts in a sense for the fact that the current stock exchange is using carbon and putting us on track for a 3.9 degree world. So however that is actually measured, then there may be measurements that come through that process. So I'm not a finance expert, but I think I see a great trend. I mean, the announcement BlackRock's made this week, there is a great trend towards investors wanting to tie up things more closely to the actual carbon counting. So I think that will come, and happy to share more information with anyone who wants to offline around that campaign, which we're just supporting for Aviva.
Sounds good.
I think also, if anybody looks at sort of the international publications, the Global Risk Report 2020 from the World Economic Forum has just come out, 15th edition, and they've got a graph, figure 2, putting the business risks, and I think for the first time, climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, natural disasters, water crisis are the top 5, followed by cyber attacks and infrastructure breakdown. So I think the global business community have recognised those important ones. So for any sort of CEOs sort of wanting to look to the international business community, that's where they're. Oh no, this was one other. Oh yes, weapons of mass destruction are still up there high near biodiversity.
But what we were also interested in whether people had particular things that they would like to join another webinar around, and if you do want to find out more and get your company involved and you're in the position where you haven't done that yet, then obviously you can sign up at our website, or we're very happy to have a call. It's not just ourselves, but quite a few other key people who have experience in this field. And one thing that I wanted to say we are offering, Ben has been running them internally, and we've offered to run in various organisations a climate emergency workshop, so you'll find details of that on our website. This could be for a wider staff group who are not particularly aware of the science or the facts, but who would like to find out what they can do, both individually and at work. Or it could be a more tailored workshop that is about, so if we want to declare, what are we doing? But we are not sustainability experts, but we do, apart from Simon, of course, but we do recognise that it can be quite valuable to have a climate emergency workshop in a larger company to engage people, because this is very much about people engagement. I don't know, Ben, if you wanted to mention that, and it might also link to the question that I skipped over unwittingly, which was when it's overwhelming for people. I think you've had some emotional reactions in the talks you've done, haven't you?
Yes, and kind of everyone goes on their own emotional journey on this, from whether it's denial and, you know, well, I'll take my chances when the world implodes, through to desperately overwhelmed and grief stricken, and, you know, people are complex things, and we have to kind of understand and give people space to understand their own emotions here. I think understanding that they will have a reaction is the first part of this, and then for those who have gone more down the sort of grief type route, it's really just giving people a space so that they understand that they're not alone. There is a whole community of people who feel the same, talking, getting support, and then really sort of working with them on what things they might do. But equally, that there are, you know, professionals who are counsellors and who deal with this stuff far better than, you know, a well-intentioned amateur like me. And where that's the case, I would definitely want to go to a third party who knows what they're doing. So it is a very difficult subject to deal with, and to just get people grounded on there are things you can do. And if we can focus on the biggest bang for the buck, which you know, Simon's hinted at, more than hinted at, has talked about, and for me, you know, it's around food, and the whole agro supply chain, and maybe people can, you know, have one vegan meal a day, 2 a week, 3 a week, or whatever it is, and there are calculators that show just how much land and water and all the rest of it that would save. There are tools which can help inspire people, you know, flying emissions, and then buying stuff, buying fashion, and then there is a whole load of new organizations that rent clothes, for example, and there's a whole breed of secondhand clothing websites. So there are lots of practical things that people can run into, and I think knowing that there are some solutions out there that, if we all did them, would make a massive impact. There are pledges, for example, you know, don't fly for a year, and if they can get 100,000 people to pledge that, the emissions are kind of off the scale. So there are practical things to do, but we do need to give people space to express their emotion and grief, and where necessary, get help with them.
Great. No, I totally agree with that, and I think it's a balance. So there's the different types of workshops. There's a whole range. We had a question from Liam. Perhaps that's our last question. Would you like to speak to that, Liam, around certification?
Yep. It was just I think when we were trying to get, so just to rewind, I think we realized this is something we wanted to get involved with, and we wanted to change. I think we were acutely aware of the issues, you know, we were causing, and we had a hand in as a developer, and we wanted to do something about it, which is why we announced our intention to declare a climate emergency. But then, before coming out and actually declaring the climate emergency and declaring what we were going to do about it, we got not say nervous, but sort of, we hesitated and thought, actually, we don't want to just cynically come out and say, oh yeah, like everybody else, we're going to declare a climate emergency, and, you know, we're going to commit to do all these things, but not really understand what that means, and not really, and potentially, you know, overpromise. So what we wanted to do is really get an understanding of what we practically and tangibly could do as a business, and what we actually could do on our projects before we declare. And because we're not, there's only about 20 of us, so we all know a bit in our own field, whether that's design or whether that's construction, about trying to become more carbon neutral in terms of reshaping our business, and in terms of committing to some achievable goals. We didn't actually know what that looked like, so we reached out to industry bodies like the UK Green Building Council, but we were also on the lookout for various sort of, you know, kite marks or certification organizations, like I think is it called Planet First, and then there's Certified B. Basically there's loads, and then that became another research mission in itself to try and find out which was the best organisation to work with to help us on that. So I think we found what organisations we are working with, but it'd be useful to know if anybody is working with another organisation aside from yourselves in terms of helping them find out what a business that declares a climate emergency looks like and where it goes. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded.
Well, it's a very useful, very important point. Ben, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, or
I'm not sure I can off the cuff. I can certainly investigate. I mean, JLL are part of a number that the Green Buildings Council is one that you just mentioned, which we are in some kind of partnership with, and there are several others. I don't know whether your question was aimed more at a sort of accreditation or a support angle, but certainly it's something that I can take away and have a look at, but I don't know off the top of my head any more than that, I'm afraid.
and I think it speaks to the fact that previous answer was, it is worth declaring because you're adding your voice. We recognise people might want to do their fact finding first, but there are science-based targets are obviously brilliant, but Nigel Topping did send me some details of what might work for an SME. So we have got some SMEs on the call. Perhaps we can share that information with you if anyone else has got that question.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Yeah. I think we're also just aware that, being a developer, especially working in places like Bristol and Brighton, as well as London, is that, people are going to have a very cynical view if a developer suddenly comes out and declares a climate emergency. So we just wanted to be fully prepared and felt like we were confident in ourselves before we come out and declare that, because we know what it could look like to some cynical people who love us developers.
That's quite a challenge, isn't it? No, I think it's good that you've done the research. I don't know whether you looked at the Better Building Partnership as well.
Yeah. They're someone who keep cropping up quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
and some of the big developers are with them.
Yeah, they do various practical tools and promotion, and they do quite a bit of lobbying particularly on building standards. I know they would like to see us moving away from, rather than certification on design, they would like to see certification on performance, and that you wouldn't get a building certification until the building was up and performing. So that's they're quite strong on that, but they are very much a sort of a business network, but they're quite useful as well.
And, I think we will be working with a lot more business networks over this year. That's our priority in our strategy, to be a multiplier through that process, and to work with all the excellent climate networks there already are. We are aware there's a construction declares, which I think started off as architects declare. So, there's a whole family of different groups that need to come together more and share best practice in this way. But I think we are drawing to a close now, and I wanted to say how much I appreciated people's questions and joining in. And if you appreciated this in any way, we'd love any small donation you might like to make, because this is not for us as individuals, but to keep the show on the road, in terms of, the kind of workshops we can do. And we are also available to do different talks and come and speak at events that you might have, so as part of the network. So if you think of anything that it would be useful to pass on to us, please do. And we'd love to get some feedback from you. So wanting to finish maybe just a few minutes early on time, it would be great to maybe all come off mute and say goodbye and thank you. And I really want to thank Ben and Simon for putting such a lot of work into this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Very helpful. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks. Really great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, this is